There's trouble in paradise. Brian Shangri-La is getting a little shingly because the folks at AEW, while the WWE is riding this wave of positive momentum, as they say, even Unca Dave apparently is saying the momentum has switched, so you know it has to be bad. The WWE has the goodwill. Triple H, the evil billionaire, has been exiled from the kingdom. They're bringing back some of the people that, well, the fans they already had liked. And over on the other side of the fence, Tony Khan is finding out that this shit ain't as easy as he thought it was because they're not all singing Kumbaya. You do not now, or are you ever going to have a locker room of 20, 30, 40 wrestlers or more that are all going to get along and are all going to be out for everybody's best interest as a group, like they're all a bunch of Boy Scouts? You're never going to have that. That's why you need someone in charge. A Vince McMahon, a Dusty Rhodes, a Bill Watts, an Eddie Graham, a whoever the fuck from whatever era of time you want to talk about. There needs to be somebody that's not only fully in charge with the power and capability to do whatever they want to do, but also that the roster is either invested in as far as having confidence in their being their leader, or if that fails, is somewhat scared of personally, not just he might fire me, but is somewhat intimidated by that, well, goddamn, we need to do the shit we need to do, and or elsewise, as Mama Cornette used to say, we're going to get a knot jerked in our tail. And this is where they're falling apart. And I hate to say I told you so. You know how bad I hate to say that, Brian. We both hate to say we told them so. But this has been coming. One of these days, we'll do a 75-hour omnibus of all the times we've told Tony Khan over the past 3.5 years or whatever it's been, 3 years, to take control of this shit and stop listening to the people that just want to hire their friends and everything else we've said. It's all happening at the same time. Where should we start? The Warner Brothers Discovery people is sending down some edicts. One of the talent having to be suspended for trying to pie-face one of the other guys who called him a fat piece of shit. The mandatory talent meetings where they're trying to rah-rah the company and let the boys know that everything's going to be okay, even though it's not. And Olivier exposing himself in that meeting as, depending on the opinion you already had of him in that locker room, as being either a leader with tough love or a giant douchebag. They've been sending out warning emails to the WWE to not tamper with their talent because, obviously, now that things are better in the WWE, certain people may have buyer's remorse about signing contracts there. And they had the episode of AEW on Wednesday night that we will forevermore title the What the Punk episode. So where should we start? Is the new AEW video game going to be named Fight Forever or Civil War?
You know, that's a good question, and you're just talking about a few things. There's even more drama than that. There's things that people know about. There's things that people don't know about. But we have been saying this for a while because we knew what was happening. We knew what people were saying. And also you could just sit back and see what's happening with the structure and organization over there. And beyond everything happening with wrestling right now, to look at it fairly, you have to think just in general, Tony Khan probably is even more spent now or has more going on now than he normally does just because it's the start of football season. There's a lot of things happening with AEW. Quite frankly, I don't know if you want to say momentum, but the buzz is kind of back with WWE a little bit right now, or at least people are curious about what's happening. There's a lot of things happening, and in the midst of all that, he has to now manage all this drama. And even if you want to say that you think Tony Khan has good ideas and everything, and you like what he does, that's fine, and I think that's fine. But maybe managing people, especially with a roster this big, isn't his strong suit, and You know, they're trying to do something.
Now correct me, because you're more of a sports fan than I am.
Yeah.
Tony Khan and his father and their family corporations, or whatever the fuck, own the Jacksonville Jaguars. And they own the Fulham League over there, the soccer team. I don't want to offend our friends across the pond, but that's so our American fans know what the fuck's going on. But he doesn't actually sign the players or deal with them directly in terms of how they perform their football/soccer playing functions. He's not telling them plays to make on the field. That's not his job, is it?
No, that's the head coach's job. I mean, to be fair, owners of sports franchises do it so they can go interact with players and tell them what they think and talk to them, be friends with them. That's what a lot of them do. But usually you have a general manager, you have a head coach, and they make the main personnel decisions and they make the main decisions about the plays. You're an owner. You have to sign off on big things. You certainly have to sign off on any big acquisition or any player you're going to bring in a trade. But the ideal situation in all of sports is a hands-off owner and a really capable general manager and manager or head coach to put everything together. But those
general managers and head coaches, they've actually done this before somewhere else for somebody else, right? Usually.
You have a level of expertise that usually you've honed across various different jobs, either as an assistant or as a coach or manager in another league, and eventually you work your way up to be a head coach or a manager, whether it's in football or any other sport. Usually they don't just give it to I don't think they ever give it to someone out of nowhere.
So why doesn't, since he's been in the football business and the soccer business longer, he's been in the wrestling business, why doesn't or hasn't Tony followed that template with the wrestling? Because now, all of a sudden, he's got a wrestling league like he's got a football league and a soccer league. But in this case, he's signing the guys. He's telling them the plays to make. He's calling the shots on the field. He's doing everything. And he's never done any of those things before anywhere. So is he departing from the logic that they operate their other sports franchises by? And why would you suddenly do that? Anyway, so where do we start? The language. Who could have ever seen this coming, that it's now being reported by Unca Dave and everybody else? So you know it's got to be true because he's got the pipeline there. That Warner Brothers Discovery, the new corporate owners, have asked AEW to tone down the language on their programs. And let's drop the 15 shits every episode. And the various son of a bitches. And I believe we had a goddamn last week. I know we had one on Raw, but I think we had one on AEW last week. And the don't wear the shirt anymore that says so-and-so is a pussy. And all that type of thing. Who could have ever seen that coming a mile away? Because all those words were being used by underneath wrestlers in positions that they're in places that they weren't called for, just because it was cute for Jane Cargill to tell Tony to cut the shit. And it was overdone, and then more people and more people started doing it because more people and more people were getting away with it. And then it's gotten to the point where they've used it in places that it didn't make any difference and didn't mean anything and didn't have any impact otherwise than to show people, oh, we're cussing, so this is cool. To the point where the principal had to step in and take a couple of the students and whack them with the ruler and say, don't be the potty mouse anymore. And that would be the new owners of the parent company of the television broadcasting stations that fucking carry their program. So for no good reason. I'm surprised it hadn't happened over the blood, and that'll be next. And remember, it was the previous administration, they got by with it when they had the bank-addicted drug robber carving people up with a pizza cutter juxtaposed with their Domino's commercial. But that was the previous administration. They're the ones that put this show on the air on purpose. The new administration has inherited this program. The new administration is also the ones that's been cutting billions of dollars off of the budget across the various platforms. And now they've got in the middle of all this where we're talking literally billions of dollars, they've got to call this fucking Yahoo wrestling promotion that's on their air a total of 3 hours a week and say, watch the language, because they got plenty of time to do that when they're dealing with billions of dollars. It's like reprimanding your delinquent children when you left them home after school because you were late getting back and they had to let themselves in and they made a mess in the kitchen. Needless, unnecessary. So now they got heat with the corporate overlords. Is there any reason for the Tourette's syndrome on this program? They've just trivialized it like everything else because they have no restraint.
That show's been the Wild West for a while. Now, we don't know what the previous administration over there thought about these things, but we definitely thought it was wise going into a new one to maybe tone it back a bit, and now it turns out they'll have to. You got to wonder if the moratorium's going to come down on blood next.
And that would be, actually, I'm surprised they didn't do it because of the amount of blood and the obvious phoniness of the blood and the fact that they have actually shot people on camera slicing themselves with a razor blade because they're not even good enough to fucking hide it anymore. I'm surprised that blood didn't beat out language, and language would be number 2. But again, why did this happen? Why did it happen now? Probably, in my experience in television, because somebody important in the company accidentally watched this show for once. And so why are they saying that shit? That's all it takes, and that's what happens. But speaking of saying shit, apparently, did you hear this? The reason that Eddie Kingston got suspended for 2 weeks, and they didn't announce it until the suspension was up, but he got suspended for 2 weeks for trying to pie-face Sammy Guevara back in the locker room because Sammy called him on television a fat piece of shit. Apparently, Sammy was doing his Ernie Ladd impression. Kingston, you big fat piece of shit. So in the interview a couple of weeks ago, and I guess they edited this, or one interview a couple of weeks ago, because they said it didn't make air, but somebody had a fan cam of it in the arena. Sammy Guevara, in the process of promoting his match with Eddie Kingston, calls him a fat piece of shit. Well, now the only reason I didn't ever call Dusty Rhodes a fat piece of shit is because we couldn't say shit on television back then. And a lot of people will say, oh, God damn it, you still shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that because Dusty was fat. Well, that fat piece of shit was going to beat the fuck out of all 3 of us and leave us laying, so he was going to get even. But apparently, Kingston got mad at this, went back screaming at Sammy, and tried to pie-face him, and they had to get in between them. And Kingston got suspended. And then he's come out and apologized, says he shouldn't have handled it that way. But he's not happy that Sammy said that. He just apologizes for the way he handled it. Whereas Sammy came out and made a statement that, well, I don't understand. Beforehand, I told the people I was working with what I didn't want said. Kingston didn't say anything about what he didn't want said. Is this where we've got... I like Kingston. Sammy apparently is getting too big for his britches with his power couple thing with old Ty, Mellow Jelly, and, you know, all of the other things. He's rubbing people the wrong way. He's already been disciplined a few times for a big mouth. But in this case, they're both wrong. Eddie Kingston, that's his gimmick. He looks like a fat piece of shit. He looks like a fucking guy from the goddamn mechanics place down on the corner in Secaucus. We've talked about this. He's every man. He doesn't have a tan. He does have a fat belly. He wasn't going to get a chance in wrestling until suddenly he got the chance based on coming out and making a splash and then having that article written about him where it tells his very interesting and compelling life story. And the whole gist of it was he wasn't supposed to be a star or on TV because he looks like shit and he didn't have any advantages and he wasn't a family member of somebody in wrestling, whatever the fuck. So he gets mad because the heel calls him a fat piece of shit. He's probably going to win, beat the heel that called him a fat piece of shit. But conversely, here's Sammy out there. They're like, well, we talked about what I didn't want mentioned. Brian, do you have any idea how many times in my career as a heel manager cutting promos on the baby faces that a baby face came up to me and said, here's what I don't want you to talk about? Take a guess.
5 times?
0. After the fact once, and I agreed with it, and I've told this story, Road Warrior Hawk came up to me after I did an interview on Atlanta TV where I said, after we beat you, Road Warriors, we're going to get you a present so maybe you can learn something. The biography of Brian Bosworth. And that line now means nothing, but at that very time, Brian Bosworth was the most famous football player in the country because he'd been popped for steroids. And Hawk came to me and said, Jimmy, yeah, I know you're quick and you come up with this shit, but we got to travel through the airports. If you start conflating he didn't use the word conflating. If you start grouping us with steroids, they might start looking through our bags. Let's not do that. I said, you know what? Point taken, Hawk. I apologize. We'll never do that again. And that was the end of it. But otherwise, no, you didn't say, oh, don't say this about me or don't say that about me. And you know what? If you didn't like something that was said about you, then you went out and tried to say something even worse about the person that said it, because that's who you were working with. You're supposed to hate them and be mad at them anyway. So it gave it a little more oomph. But now they're all sitting down and going, well, don't say this about this or don't say that about me or whatever the fuck. And they're swinging at each other in the locker room. I know you have not been in a position where somebody had to come to you and say, don't say this on TV about me or vice versa. And now nobody tells us what to say. But can you imagine if you're a fucking wrestler and you're accusing your opponent that you're working with of being too stiff on interviews to make it sound too real and get people too interested?
I forget exactly what started that question because
I'm saying you've never been in that position, but no. Where somebody's asking you not to. But if you're a wrestler and you're working with somebody on TV, obviously you're not going to come out and announce like Shawn Michaels tried to do to Bret Hart that somebody's screwing around on their wife or whatever. But I mean, any personal goddamn remark, I would have not had the courage or the guts. It would have been embarrassing to go up to any of the guys, Dusty or the Road Warriors or the Rock and Roll or Magnum, whoever, and say, well, please don't say this about me or my team.
Don't say anything about my glasses.
Yeah, don't talk about the fact that I'm nearsighted or what. I don't. So,
well, the other
anyway,
thing,
that was Kingston, and Kingston's been making a lot of friends lately, hadn't he?
Well, the other part of the equation you have to think about is maybe Sammy has rubbed some people the wrong way in the past in the back. So it's not like
that's the story also coming out from the other side, apparently, that, well, he's been increasingly harder to deal with and or big-headed.
I agree with you for the most part about Kingston. And I mean, we've been saying it on the show. He is the everyman. He has been horribly misused. And we said it was going to happen as soon as they programmed him with Jericho. And it just so happens it's exactly what happened. They didn't capitalize on any of the buzz or momentum around Eddie Kingston. They still could because people still like and relate to the everyman. But if him and Sammy are going into this match, it wasn't really a program, they were building up the match. If they were going into this match and there was already issues between the two of them, then maybe Sammy should have thought better about calling him a fat piece of shit. Adrian Street told me years ago that, remember, he went to Florida in like 83, I think. Or, yeah, it was 83. Yeah. And he was doing pretty good.
After Memphis.
And then he called Dusty a fat pig or something on TV when Dusty was the booker. And all of a sudden, Adrian wasn't used so well anymore. So, I mean, that's the thing. It's one thing if you're working with someone who, whether the people know it or not, you're friends with, and you know you can get away with some shit, that's one thing. But if you already have problems with someone, and you know that person already thinks you're a fucking loudmouth or whatever it is, and then you go out there and you say that, I hate to say, well, Eddie's already said he shouldn't have put his hands on him. So I'll go with what Eddie said about it. But you shouldn't be surprised when someone wants to do that if you burn someone you already have problems with.
And I will say, in fairness to Dusty, he had a business mind, though, and he could recognize that because I've said the first time that we worked with him in Mid-South, I cut the promo. I said, you know what that big red spot is on Dusty Rhodes' side? That's where they dermabrazed the word Goodyear off. So it wasn't really calling him a fat piece of shit. It had some creativity to it, but he gave me a job for that. Anyway, so now, is Kingston on sideways with people on Twitter now, too? I heard there was some issue on Twitter, him, Disco Inferno, something else going on.
Well, yeah, Kingston's been pretty active on Twitter today as we are recording. And let me just scroll down a little bit because I have his Twitter feed here at MadKing1981 on Twitter. And, of course, now the word has gotten out, as we just talked about, that he's been suspended. So people are curious what's going on with Eddie Kingston. And I'm going to go down a few, and it started with him posting a song, Long Gone Day by Mad Season, saying, quote, never totally bury your opponent, end quote. This is one of the first lessons about promos that Chris Jericho learned according to his first book, A Lion's Tale, Around the World in Spandex. So that obviously relates to what Sammy said, don't bury your opponent is what he's saying there. Then the Disco Inferno, I guess, commented about this whole thing, although I don't think he tagged Eddie Kingston in it, but he wrote, wrestlers and fans need to pull a full stop on this fat-shaming bullshit. The wrestlers being fat-shamed need to put the effort in to go to the gym and diet instead of playing victim. Do the fucking work and stop embarrassing this industry. To which Eddie Kingston replied, you never did the work and the boys kept you around to laugh at you.
Oh, God.
I remember hearing the story where Big Show farted in your face.
Oh, God.
You ain't a man. And that's why we need more guys from the New York tri-state area in the wrestling business right there, ladies and gentlemen. And then he said, in a separate tweet, trying to be a bigger person, as they say, but come on, man. There is so much shit coming out of people's mouths. And last thing I will say about my suspension, I was in the wrong for touching another man's face. Let it go. And there's the action of Eddie Kingston on Twitter today, but a pretty memorable burn of Disco Inferno that everyone's talking about right now. And apparently you're trending again.
What did I do now?
I don't... Inside the Ropes posted an article, Jim Cornette criticizes Johnny Gargano's WWE return. That may have triggered it, I don't know.
They should have waited for this fucking show. I went into a lot more detail. But anyway, getting back to the subject that we were talking about.
Yeah, what do you think of Kingston and Disco Inferno?
Well, honestly, that's the best thing Disco had going for him is he had a nice little physique going for him there, but Jesus H. Christ. Fat shaming. Fuck. And here's another thing. It was a rule of thumb when a babyface had a glaring weakness, right? Had a glaring weakness, like Mr. Wrestling 2 was old, so don't call him an old man, especially as he'd say when that old man's about to kick your ass. Or, whatever the case, when the babyface had a glaring weakness, you weren't supposed to say that, unless when they got to the point where they were as over as Dusty Rhodes, yes, the opponents, Terry Funk could say, you big fat egg-sucking dog, and it didn't diminish Dusty Rhodes in the least because he was a goddamn megastar. But yeah, you are not supposed to just truthfully tear down a babyface with everything that's wrong with him and no redeeming value and don't put him over at all. That's obviously, you don't want to just make your opponent look like shit. But a babyface calling a heel, good God. Every fat heel in the business was called fat by the baby face that was fucking with them. And if there was a baby face that was fat or old or bald or something, that probably got in there a little bit as well. But fat shaming now, they're wrestlers. It's wrestling. Hurt some people's feelings. You can't expect somebody to want to see a motherfucker get even for something if it wasn't anything worth getting even for. So, oh golly, I got peanut butter on your chocolate. Well, we got to fight. No, fuck you. You stole my girl. You fucked my wife. You killed my dog. You stole my title. You wrecked my car. Anyway, let's go back to the talent meeting that they had. Because apparently, Tony had to call a mandatory talent meeting before the TV taping to try to settle all these fucking various warring factions down, whether it's the North or the South or the Yankees and the Rebels or whatever the case it is. And a bunch of Tony spoke, and Tony is not going to fucking yell at anybody or cuss anybody or browbeat anybody. Everybody apparently said that Tony was up-tempo and rah-rah about things that were going on in the company and all the new promotions that he's given so that other people can actually talk to somebody.
Animated is the word we heard used.
Animated was the word we heard. That he's always animated. Good God, if he was any more animated, you'd have to tie him down with goddamn straps. But at the same time, also, apparently, he let everybody know that the legal team, his legal expert, Megan or Mega or whatever her name is, she is technically... Mega. She's technically the number 2 person in the company. The way they've got this, and that scares the shit out of me also for them. And anybody wanting to sign a contract with AEW for a length of time in the best years of your career, understand that the number 2 person in this company is apparently a lawyer that I'm pretty sure had never been to a live wrestling event before 3 years ago and may not even have ever seen one on television, and she's now rated number 2 in the company, according to Uncle Dave's list of the pecking order. So if Tony gets run over by a Greyhound bus tomorrow, she's going to be the one giving out the finishes.
And I could be wrong, but I believe, like Tony, she's not confined to AEW. I believe she's involved with the various different interests of the Khan family and sports and entertainment, so she's not a full-time AEW employee unless they've changed that and I'm wrong.
So they got a part-time number 1 and a part-time number 2.
But they treat it like a full-time job.
Well, yes, they just don't sleep, which always contributes to your creativity. So at the meeting, they said that old number 2 there had sent a threatening email to the WWE, don't tamper with our contracted talent. Because, of course, as overtures have been being made, hey, it's better up here now. We know the old man ran you off, but come on back. So they're putting a stop to that, which may backfire on, I mean, the people in the building there, the talent roster, are mostly hostages now because they've all signed to ridiculously long contracts for what they thought was a good deal at the time. But now that they're finding out that Vince is gone and it may be a new day up there, so to speak, maybe they're not so happy, but they ain't going to get to go anywhere because Tony's going to play hardball with those contracts. So, and then also apparently the executive vice presidents stood up and spoke, including the Hardley Boys, and then, of course, everybody's favorite Twinkle Toes, Kenny Olivier. As we mentioned, we got reports that some of the cosplay trampoline cowboys on the roster just loved the tough love and the stern talking to that Harpo gave him in his breathy voice, but the pro wrestlers in the crowd and the people who can see through this twattish bullshit said that it was an epic display of douchebaggery. So I wonder which side was correct.
They were laughing about it. People came out of that meeting laughing about Omega, the things he said, and whatever he was trying to get across. Like you said, I think it probably reached his friends better than it reached anyone he thought it was going to reach. It was laughable, is the way it was put to me.
Preaching to the choir. What did he say? If I was the promoter or the booker, I wouldn't hire 8 out of 10 of you.
8 out of 10.
This is a guy who the only way he got a job to be on television in this country is because the fucking mark with all the money was baffled and blinded by the hypnosis of this Japanese fantasy that they've brought out where everything's better in Tokyo.
And reminder, he didn't pop the rating at all last week for his return, and I know people didn't know he was going to be there.
He popped the balloon of the rating. They had 1 million people till they saw his face was going to be on the show.
But again, they have him speaking there. He hasn't been there on a day-to-day basis in a while because of his injuries, and he's been dealing with the video game, which we still haven't had released yet and had people actually play it. But while all that's going on, CM Punk firmly established himself as the biggest star in that company, biggest ratings draw in that company, everything. He's not speaking. The guys who are trying to reassert the feeling they wanted people to have about them early on, that they really are executive vice presidents, are speaking. Nobody wants to go talk to the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega for advice. The wrestlers who aren't already their friends think they're boobs. They don't want to go talk to them.
The only people that are going to take advice from the Hardleys and Harpo are the people that they're already giving advice to, and that's why those people are shitty wrestlers also, because they're listening to it. As you said, everybody else thinks they're fucking idiots.
Hey, Kenny, I've been in this locker room for a few years. I know we haven't talked, but I really love what you've done with this women's division. Can you give me some advice about how I can make my shit better? Get the fuck out of here.
Or, hey, Hardley boys, can you give us some tips on how not to put over better talent and swerve the people into a completely different angle with somebody else that you'd rather fucking work with instead of what's good for business? But that's, again, you just mentioned Punk had become the ratings draw, the top guy. And regardless of what you think of the talent or lack thereof of Twinkle Toes and the Hardleys and the rest of their ilk, it's not up for debate. It's not in question. The biggest mainstream wrestling star on that roster would be either CM Punk or Chris Jericho. And Punk was fresher, bigger, more recently than Mr. Jericho. But if you're going to have somebody speak, a former WWF champion that is headlined, main evented, pay-per-views, and live events for the biggest company in the business, or these 2 or 3 fucking naive little waifs that get their panties in a bunch when everybody doesn't like their performance art and have never done anything of note anywhere else. They've been, Twinkle Toes was he was on TV. Was he on? No, he's never been on TV in this country.
No, he was on New Japan. On New Japan, he was on.
Well, okay.
On Access, which wasn't rated.
On New Japan on Access. Okay, yes. And I mean, there's fucking hidden kidnap victims you can find easier than that television program. The Bucks had been on Ring of Honor television and Impact.
Generation Me, right? Was that them?
Yeah, Generation Me.
Who knew how true that was?
And they'd been underneath talent. And so to say, and we know what Jericho's mind has melted, but to actually intimate that any of those guys, Moxley even, we know his goddamn brain has been turned to jelly by whatever the fuck has happened to him, concussive effects of blows to the head or substances or whatever the fuck. But if anybody in the world tries to think that Twinkle Toes and the Hardleys are as big a names in wrestling as Jericho or Moxley or Punk, you're out of your fucking mind. And it's just that they can't admit it.
And there's been a lot of structure issues and a lot of behind-the-scenes issues that we've talked about on the air and a lot we haven't talked about on the air. And I think they do need to do a lot to fix these things, and you got to start now. And I don't agree with some of the people and some of the people that Tony's elevating, but I think it's a start. But the idea that now, all these years later, after everything that's happened in the last year, the original EVPs are going to try to reassert their power and influence over everything is a joke because of everything that's happened. And let's not forget, usually in business, you become an executive vice president, unless someone's going to acquire your company or something and just promote you and elevate you. You become an executive vice president maybe after you've been a senior vice president, which happens usually after you've been a vice president. Maybe before that you were product manager or something. I really don't know. Maybe you started as an assistant. You worked your way up. Usually it's not, hey, I'll make you an executive vice president because I understand you guys want to do whatever Triple H does. And that's the only reason they became executive vice presidents.
Hey, you know what? And here's the thing. Remember, one of the Harley Boys' wives got named as the head of merchandise. I wonder how that's turned out because she had been mailing out their T-shirts that they sold when they did their own merchandise, which makes me think that, well, my God, then the next time some billionaire starts a fucking wrestling promotion is on national cable television, I can just have Hotchkiss Featherbottom be the marketing and merchandising manager because he mails my T-shirts out.
And no one's had more friends hired and elevated than the Bucks. And in a lot of cases, it hasn't been justified. Again, after all this time, Omega's going to try to reassert some kind of influence over there. He's going to be the next executive vice president out the door. And he's going to try to do this.
I don't think he's going to quit, and I don't think they're going to fire him. I think they're going to give him a permanent leave of absence because he's fragile mentally. We know that, and he's going to crack up, and they're going to have to fucking book him a rubber room at the Puzzle Factory, and they'll just say that, okay, if you see Kenny, just tell him he's still an EVP because he's really forgotten where he lives anyway, and he's on medication.
He's going to be the next one out the door, and especially then, you're going to hear people laughing about this. People are already laughing. If you're not in their camp, or some young wrestler who's just worried and is going to sit there and listen to what anyone says, they're laughing about Kenny Omega's performance. And that's what it was. It was a performance. It was a show. They're laughing about his performance in that meeting. They're not laughing about Tony, even though there's laughable elements to the way he gets animated, but they're laughing about Kenny.
They can tell that Tony genuinely means well. He's just a rich kid with a lot of money and a fantasy of doing what he's doing now.
And a good heart.
And a good heart.
They know he's a nice guy and a good guy, yeah.
And I've said I wouldn't be crucifying him and blistering him if he'd have started the company and let experienced people operate it. But, you know, you get what you get when you do this. Anyway, let's talk about this.
And that's why we're in the situation we're in now with AEW. Again, there's drama that everyone knows about. There's drama that people publicly don't know about. We haven't even talked about this Thunder Rosa thing, which is a whole nother story. But all across AEW, what we were told was the friendliest locker room, the happiest locker room, the greatest place to work. It really is an AEW civil war. And there really is a lot of things going on that need to be fixed, and you need leadership. And I hope for the best, but right now I got a real bad feeling about a lot of things there.